Hi, everybody. Welcome to, I don't know why my computer is making that sound. Welcome to Wednesday, your Wednesday panel. We have made it past halfway and you all are doing amazing work. So thank you. A few quick announcements before we get into this panel, which I'm so excited about. Laura is an incredible heart and mind. So I'm really glad to have her meet you all. Few quick announcements. 95% of our goal on our Change a Life, $95,000 raised in 48 hours. We just had a conversation with Giles, who is in Ukraine right now, and he shared with us a story of a few Ukrainians he's met in hospital. Their stories are profound and devastating, but he's working with activists there and organizations with Legacy of War and Random Acts. We're coming together. You're making it happen. So we have some information about what will happen if we exceed our goal of $100,000. Some really important work is going to be done specifically for our Ukrainians with disabilities in getting their autonomy with some specialized wheelchairs and a lot more that we'll be sharing over the next couple of days. So thank you to everyone who's donated. Thank you to everyone who's gotten others to donate. That is huge. We are very, very appreciative. And the next phase of this fundraiser is going to do incredible work. So we will let you all know about that soon, but that you can watch that conversation on YouTube and Facebook. Giles is an inspiration to all of us, and he's leading the way. So I also wanted to make another quick pitch for the Random Acts 1,000 Acts of Kindness. They've gotten 300 submissions so far, and those acts of kindness have helped 11,546 people, 4,154 animals, including thousands of salmon and many cats, and 26 countries have been covered so far. So they have earmarked about $50,000 to send financial assistance to those who want to provide acts of kindness around the world. So you just have to fill out the form. I mean, anybody can do it. You have to show some identification and things like that for legal reasons, but they will send you money, and all you got to do is show them the good you're doing, and we can spread small acts of kindness all over the world. A lot more coming this week, obviously. We've got more panels coming. We've got our closing ceremonies coming. We've got more items, some big announcements, and there's just a lot. And so if you're feeling like you need to take a break, obviously take breaks. This is a marathon, not a sprint. A lot to do. So why don't we get into our panel? Enough of me talking here. So as a compassion, communication, and leadership coach, she's an international best-selling author. She's a speaker. She's founder of the Compassion Code Academy, and she's a trainer for the Grief Recovery Institute. Laura Jack provides in-depth training, both personally and professionally, for those who want to compassionately navigate change and challenge with confidence and ease. Her mission is to create a culture of compassion, starting with self. And I just want to say at the very beginning here, during this panel, we will be discussing grief and loss. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that before we get into it. So if anyone is sensitive to those topics or needs to step away, totally understand. But hopefully you'll gain some insight and wisdom here. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm so happy to be here. And I'm so glad I got to hear all the amazing things you're already doing, or that have even just been happening in the last 48 hours. It's just awesome.
Yeah, isn't it awesome that people are incredible? The GISH community is incredible. And I'm so glad to have you speaking to them today. I think, a lot of us, after pandemic, after all these things, the things that are happening in the world, we're finding ourselves in a place where we're either in desperate need of help or desperately wanting to know how to help. And I think today we're going to be able to cover some great topics about that. Well, let's just dive in real quick. So you wrote the book, The Compassion Code, which is a thoughtful guide for anyone who wants to understand and integrate more compassion into their life. The book not only focuses on how to better practice compassion, but for others, but also gets into how we do that for ourselves. Why is it important to start with our compassion for ourselves.
I know, right? It seems so. One of my favorite things to ask people when I start a group discussion is, how many of you consider yourself a compassionate person? And most of the time when I look around the room, and anybody's welcome to write yes. If you feel like you are a compassionate person, go ahead and write yes in the chat. And we get, usually about 95% of people are like, I'm a compassionate person. I don't always know what that means. I am. I feel like that's true for me. The second question, how many of you are compassionate with yourself on a regular basis? So if the answer is now yes, okay, see, yes, exactly. Nope, ouch, yeah, yeah, right. So we're seeing it. That's the discrepancy. And that discrepancy is actually what leads to burnout. It's what leads to compassion fatigue. If any of you are familiar with that terminology, if you're in healthcare or in, any kind of service profession where you help humans. And so really it's about learning that if we are not compassionate with ourselves on a regular basis, the ability to be compassionate with others is incredibly difficult. And it leads to depletion, right? And we're giving from what I call, that kind of the bottom of your water bottle, you get the backwash. It's giving from backwash instead of giving from this like overflowing cup.
Yeah, backwash. It's gross, but it's also true.
And it's so visual, right?
So visual, which is what I wanted to visualize. Backwash,
exactly.
burnout.
I figured. Yeah.
Well, so you describe a compassion sort of bell curve in your teaching. What does that look like? What does it mean? Actually, I think we could share a graphic here too.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. So this is the bell curve that's in my book, actually. And in the middle, if you notice, is compassion, right? And compassion is relating kindly to yourself and others in moments of challenge or stress, right? On the right hand, this is a regular standard deviation bell curve. So on the right hand side, you'll see empathy. And empathy is feeling with someone. So that for those of you who, many of you are likely empathetic, you are constantly feeling other people's feelings. So you hear something on the news and you start crying. You watch a commercial and you start crying, right? Like it's just, we live in this world where we're feeling so much for so many. If we feel so much for so many without tools, it leads to burnout. And then on the other side of burnout, when we're burnt out for so long, it leads to disconnection. And so disconnection means, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm out. That's why we're seeing this great resignation with teachers in healthcare. Literally, you name the profession, and that is a huge part of what you're seeing is people are just saying, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And that's disconnection. Okay. On the other side of the bell curve, right, you have sympathy, which is feeling for someone. And on the other side of feeling for someone, which is kind of, it like gives us a little bit of this distance, which in some ways is healthy. And if we're not careful, it leads to pity. And pity is when we kind of start othering people, or like, oh, those people are, and it gets so disconnected often that it also leads to disconnection. So what I always say is both sides lead to disconnection if we don't start with compassion for ourselves first.
That's beautiful. I mean, it's a grounding quality to say I care about myself, and that will help me not fall into those disconnected poles on either side. I can see myself in that curve, depending on the year, depending on the moment in my life. It's falling one or the other. Yeah.
I actually appreciate you saying that, because people often say like, I don't know where I am. And the truth is we are all we fall into different places depending on whether it's a social or personal or professional situation, who it's with. I don't fall into empathy overload or burnout except with my family and my closest friends, where I like have had in the past, and working on this, letting go of it when it's not mine, but just being there in presence, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, definitely.
I do want to just say though too is empathy. I just want to give this little tip, which the preventative to leaning into compassion on the empathy side, since so many of us are on the empathy side of things, is to have boundaries, healthy boundaries are actually the key to leaning into compassion rather than falling into the burnout.
So boundaries can help sort of create a structure around us that we don't fall into those places. Got it.
Right, exactly.
Well, let's talk a little bit. I think we're talking about having compassion for ourselves, and sort of maybe there's a thinking positively or a mindfulness or things like that that help us do that. But we also see so much sort of like inspirational content in our online lives, especially as people are sharing all these like, look how great everything is, and if you just do this, you're going to be great. There's so much of that now that I think people have begun to realize and recognize this concept of toxic positivity. You also have talked about how we need to shift from positivity to possibility. Like, what does that mean?
Right. So the thing about positivity without any kind of rooted foundation of understanding of what we're actually going through is, like I always say, we actually have to have grief before gratitude, or gratitude just becomes this box we check on that kind of proverbial, I need to do this today, like that morning routine, I need to have my gratitude. We actually need to create the space for ourselves and others to feel the feelings that aren't considered good or positive, right? So we actually have to have the space. It doesn't mean dwell in the space forever. It means we have to have a space to vent out what's not going well inside, the real feelings, the truth, so that we can then find our way to gratitude. It's way, way more difficult, honestly, to do gratitude first, because then it feels like we're just covering up what's true underneath, which is we all have feelings because we're human.
Yeah, I love the concept that you're putting forward, which is, feeling those feelings before we get to a place of like positivity. It's almost like we're just going to sweep it under the rug. We're like, if we just think good enough, we're going to be fine. You also kind of mentioned in your, you have a starter guide on your site that, it may help us sort of understand that a little bit better. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, I have two tools, and we won't get into them too deeply today, just for the sake, I know we have a limited time together. But I talk about the compassion hat and the grief colored glasses. And the idea is, and I love that Tens is doing the cat, because really that was the goal, was to have it be something very physical, right? So the compassion hat means putting ourselves into somebody else's shoes, right? Those proverbial walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. And the idea is giving somebody the benefit of the doubt thinking, right? Which also kind of lines up with this possibility thinking, like, I wonder what's going on with that person, right? So compassion actually sounds like curiosity. And so in the Compassion Code Starter Guide, I go into detail about like what compassion actually sounds like, the words that we use, and also what to say instead of the ones that people often use. But curiosity is actually the cure for compassion. Because when we're curious, and we start off, I wonder what's going on, it can really like remove all that judgment, because then we're not assuming we already know what's going on. And benefit of the doubt thinking, like possibility thinking, is I wonder, possibility, what's going on with that person? Or, God, I was just really rude. I wonder, instead of, gosh, what's wrong with me? It's, I wonder what's going on with me today. I wonder what's going on. What's up for me? Right? Because sometimes we lash out and then we're embarrassed because we feel ashamed, right? Especially if we yell at our children or, whatever it may be. And then we're like, gosh. And instead of beating ourselves up, which is not the self-compassionate response, we actually say, pause, right? The difference between a reaction and a response is a breath. So I wonder what's going on with me today. Oh, I didn't get much sleep, or gosh, I need a little bit more alone time, or, I haven't had any movement in my day. And I like notice myself feeling like I'm going a little bit like anxious, right? So ultimately, it's like this option to take a pause and breathe and ask ourselves with curiosity what's going on, whether it's for us or someone else.
Yeah, and it's when we get judgmental about ourselves and we're not compassionate, there's like a lack of curiosity. There's like almost an assumed knowingness about who we are or what's going on, and
Yeah.
there's no real room for any other things to sort of enter in there.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. You also you have a really interesting take on the drama triangle that was created by Stephen Cartman back in the 60s. It describes sort of a destructive interaction where you have like interpersonal conflict. And I think it would be helpful if you could share a little bit about that, because if we're talking about moving from this place of judgment and sort of shame into a different way of looking at things, would you mind sharing that triangle? It helped me when you mentioned it.
For sure. Yes. So if you notice on the bottom one's our traditional model. That's the Cartman's drama triangle. And so and there are various interpretations of this, but the hero is kind of the person who comes and saves the day, right? And we have a heroing culture, right? That's something that we like. And I'm going to turn it on its head for a second. Then we have the villain, right? The villain is the person who we kind of blame, who we're mad at, what, like it can be a micro or a macro level, right? Like we can blame like society, or we can blame our father, right? Like it's just and I'm just giving some examples. And then we have the victim, which is like, this is happening to me. Life is happening to me, right? And that is a super disempowered place. And so if you notice, like literally, if you turn it upside down, you'll see that the hero can be shifted with the coach. So the coach means that we are not necessarily saving someone, we are helping someone save themselves. Like we are coaching, we are offering maybe a different perspective, because as one of my colleagues said to me, you can't see the label on your own pickle jar. Right? You can't always see what is here. So that's why we need people in our lives, whether they're coaches or counselors or people like friends, family, who can help us see what's going on the inside, because we can't see our own label, right? And then we have the challenger, which is the opposite of the villain, right? So the challenger is like a healthy. Have you ever heard of tough love, Charlie? Like,
I've heard about it, but yeah, I've read about it. Yeah.
right. So the tough love is like not just saying, oh yeah, whatever you say. It's the person who actually challenges you to think differently, right? So it's not necessarily bad. It can actually be incredibly helpful, right? And then we have the creator. This is my favorite part, because the victim, I call this the empowered creator of their own life. Okay, so that's what I like to say is the victim shifts into the empowered creator, right? And the empowered creator, life is happening for them, not to them. Now, granted, I want to give a caveat here, because people say, well, what about children? What about abuse? What about things from our childhood? And what I say to that is, yes, like really, when we're children, we are often victims.
Yeah.
And when we grow up, we have to make a new choice with support, hopefully, to become the empowered creator of our life, because we can't actually decide what happens to us. So often at the time, life can happen to us, right? And then we get to decide how we want to rise as the hero of our own lives, right? Not somebody heroing us, but to be our own hero.
Yeah.
And to be the empowered creator, where we say, this happened to me and I'm not going to let this define who I am anymore, right? And this has been a big shift for me, because I know I struggled with feeling disempowered by the things that had happened in my life, and then deciding I don't want to let this rule me. I want to be the empowered creator of my own life. And so I hope that's helpful and clear.
Yeah. It's interesting. The reason I think, for me at least, that it resonates so deeply is that you're not trying to minimize the things that have happened to you. You're not saying that these things don't matter, or that you're fully responsible for everything that's ever happened. You're not saying in some arbitrary or abstract way that there's some sort of everything's connected, and therefore you're saying that our relationship to these things and the way we treat ourselves and the way we respond to the things that happen to us, there's a shifting lens around it that we can use, a tool that we can use to try to find opportunity, find wholeness in ourselves, find a new way of looking at people, rather than like hero is an interesting concept. It's a very lionizing position. You're like, that person is all powerful, they're a hero. We have to treat people with respect, but I think sometimes we lose sight of our own value in that proposition too.
Right. It doesn't allow us to be the hero of our own life when we give that position to somebody else.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is just to sort of put it there is that, this is a way of looking at things rather than, obviously therapy and seeking help and treatment, those are important things. So this is not to say that this discounts or takes the place of any of that, but
absolutely. Thank you for saying that. No, it's so important that ultimately the way that we help ourselves is by seeking support. We aren't meant to do this alone. I feel like so many of my clients will say things like, I feel like I'm supposed to know how to do this stuff, this emotional stuff. And I'm like, supposed to according to whom? Who told you you're supposed to know? Do you know how to fix your own car? Do you know how to fix your own heart? No, we go see specialists for that. Emotions are also complicated. Being a human being is complicated. And so there is no shame to receive help. In fact, we're not meant to do this life alone. We are meant to do it in community, in collaboration. That's why I love what you're doing with GISH, because you're doing this in community, collaboratively, to help each other and help ourselves.
Absolutely. You mind if we take a few questions from the audience? There's some people here in the Q&A.
Sure.
So Elizabeth says, sometimes I have a hard time being compassionate with others who aren't. What are some steps I can take to be more understanding with them?
So that is great. And it goes back to what I wanted to talk about was the grief colored glasses, right? So putting on our grief colored glasses. So I want to talk for just a second about what grief actually is. Okay. So grief, according to the Grief Recovery Institute, and this definition alone changed my life. Okay. And I'm going to write it in the chat as I say it, just so you can look at it for those of you who are visual. The conflicting feelings. So hear me, the conflicting feelings that come at the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. The conflicting feelings, not the sad, bad, terrible feelings, the conflicting feelings, the feelings that are in conflict essentially when things change. So let's look at the pandemic for a second. So we all went through tremendous changes in the familiar patterns of behavior. Okay. So much grief because we were all in conflicting feelings. And Charlie, you know this story, but my mom died 14 years ago and I didn't have a lot of conflicting feelings. I was mostly just devastated.
Yeah.
And over the years, I've come to really appreciate aspects of me being the empowered creator of my own life, because her death is what guided me to my purpose. So now the conflicting feelings are, well, I have so much freedom around how I choose to live my life, because really the only opinion that mattered to me at the time was hers. And her death actually led to a tremendous amount of odd freedom, because instead of being like, what do you think I should do, Mom? It became, what would my mom want for me? Which became my own inner voice, which was a fascinating, conflicting feeling, right? And so interestingly, with this grief colored glasses, to answer your question, how do I have compassion? And honestly, chapter 19 of my book, it talks about how to have compassion for people who do what we consider terrible things, right? Essentially, we have to remember that every single human being on earth has a story of grief, a story of loss, a story of heartache. People are not broken, but they are often brokenhearted, and broken hearts heal, which is where there's hope. And broken hearts lead to sometimes some terrible things. It can lead to either an implosion, so hurting ourselves, whether it's a microaggression like biting our nails, cutting as it gets bigger and bigger, to all the way to suicide, where we hurt ourselves, right? And then there's the explosion, right? Which is where we hurt someone else, whether it's with our words, whether it's with our actions, whether it's violence, whether it becomes like war, right? But it gets bigger and bigger. And so if we aren't able to clear that grief, clear out what's going on inside, and we just paste over it with our positivity, right? Then that is what leads to us having implosion and explosion. So we need safe places and safe people to be able to express ourselves honestly without judgment, with compassion. And so when we see somebody doing something, the best thing you can do with that compassion, going back to the question from the audience, is you think inside your head, HMM, I wonder what happened to that person. And hear my tone. I'm not like, what happened? Right? I'm like, I wonder what happened. Exactly, Jillian. Hurt people hurt people. And I love actually saying healing people help people heal. Because when we work on ourself and our own self healing, which is one of the most compassionate things we can do, is help ourselves. That helps us help others. It helps us help others.
So true. And different people are at different points in their lives. Some are not ready to hear it. And that's a hard thing when you want to help others. I don't know if it's a masculinity issue or if it's just the way I was raised or who I am, but there's such an intense, innate desire to help people or fix things or whatever. But we also have to be tactful about how we approach that. Kate actually asked, do you have any thoughts on ways that you can help encourage others to explore this kind of work?
Honestly, one of the best things I would encourage you to do is do your own work and lead by example, because it's easy to be like, you need help. It's funny because people will call me like, my sister really needs to see you. And I'm like, what's going on? Our mom died. Oh, so your mom died? Yeah, my mom died, but my sister's having a really hard time.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Right. The best thing we can do though, when we want somebody else to do something, is to do it ourselves, because then telling somebody to do something that we're not willing to do, it doesn't really go that well. It's like, do as I say, not as I do. Right. And as Charlie and I have talked about, as parents, that doesn't work. And neither as friends or siblings or children or anything. And so really, if we can do our own personal work, even if we're like, I don't even know what my grief is. Well, grief is the conflicting feelings that come when things change. So we all have it. It's a loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations. It's what we wished were different, better, and more in our lives, which we all go through daily, honestly.
Yeah.
Right. And so being able to encourage through our own actions can be very helpful, because then we're modeling what it looks like to heal. And not saying you should heal, right? Because nobody likes being shoulded on.
That's not super curious to already know what the person needs, right? Like this is the trap I also fall into.
Right. Well, in the Compassion Code Starter Guide, I really go into those details about like what to say and what not to say, because we have this tendency to speak from our heads instead of from our hearts.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, at least they're in a better place. Oh, you should be over by now. It's been like, what, 3 years since you broke up with that guy?
Yeah.
Right. And those shoulds and those at least are heartbreaking and isolating for the person who's going through it. And no, I have never met a single person who likes that, who likes being told that they should do something, or at least something has, oh, at least they're in a better place, but they're not here for me. Right. Like when people are like, your mom's in a better place. I'm like, but she's not with me and I miss her.
Yeah. That's
right?
what it is.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so I want to just say, like, when people share from the depths of their heart, we say, thank you. We say, thank you so much for sharing your truth with me. And that can honestly be it if you have nothing else, right? Like you say thank you because what that means is they had the courage to tell you their truth.
Wow. Well, Laura, thank you. I want people to be able to find you and follow you, and if they need to reach out to you, if they're interested in this work. So you are at thecompassioncodeacademy.com and you're on social media. What other projects do you have going on? Do you have anything you want to share about what you're working on, where you want people to go?
So I really want them to read pages 7 through 9 of the Compassion Code Starter Guide.
Yeah.
Because I want them to feel supported when it comes to those what to say and what not to say, even inside their own heads. Because I recognize a huge percentage of our conversations are actually internal, right? So the what do I say or what don't I say? I want you to also apply these things to you, right? Because it can be a life-giving experience when we give ourselves love and respect. What I'm most excited about right now, oh my gosh, what just happened? I don't even know. And I saw so many beautiful things in the chat, and I tried not to watch because I would get so distracted because I have ADD. And so I was like, okay, I'm not looking because I will never come back. So I apologize for not being able to answer live, and maybe I can go back and answer the questions later. But ultimately, what I'm most excited about right now is I'm working on changing education and giving people these tools earlier and earlier. And I'm working with a lot of school districts and superintendents. I'm working with leaders in every field. I'm working with hospitals. I saw somebody saying, I'm a nurse, what do I do? And I work with hospitals and physicians and nurses and staff, because burnout is real. It's
So
very
real.
real. Over giving, people pleasing, perfectionism is who I have been for most of my life.
Yeah.
And so I have been working so hard to stop this for myself, having those healthy boundaries that we talked about with kindness. It's not, you don't have to be rude about it, right? It's just about being kind and also standing up for yourself. And one of the things, as you know, Charlie, is I've been working on not abandoning myself for the good of someone else, because that has been a pain that I have had for most of my life, is abandoning what I need or my wants or my truth for somebody else's comfort. And so I really encourage people to really learn. And if you need my support, of course, reach out, and to learn how to take a stand for you with kindness.
Beautiful. And this is such a powerful statement. So we have a challenge for everybody. And I just want to also, again, reiterate, it sounds like this starter guide on the compassioncodebook.com, pages 7 through 9. We want to make sure that when we're doing this item, that we come from a place of curiosity and kindness. And so go read those pages if you can. Just Google it or go to that website. So here's the challenge for you all. We're gonna do something that helps us get a little bit more vulnerable and a little bit less curated in the world, a little bit less toxic positivity for a minute. So Laura Jack described how everyone has struggles that they often hide from public view. Make a reusable portable sign such as a chalkboard, whiteboard, or letterboard that says, I am struggling with blank. Or the truth is, I feel blank. And get someone to fill in the blank with something that has been challenging them. Take a photo of them holding the sign and posing in the most happy, beautiful, carefree pose they can. Post your image on Instagram, tagging #GISH and @LauraJackCoaching. Make sure you have their permission to post their photo. It's going to be 27 points. I cannot underscore this enough. Oh, sorry. And also tomorrow, we're going to be talking to an incredible human being, lawyer, librarian, activist about public spaces. Jeremy Abbott is going to be talking to us about public spaces and the institutions that we have and how we deal with them. It's a really interesting conversation. This gentleman is a genius, as has been the case for all of our panelists here. And we've got lots more, obviously. We've got Lily Hevesh, amazing domino creator, Annabeth Gish, Bobak Ferdowsi, closing ceremonies, so much more. But I just want to again reiterate that with this item, you're getting permission and you're making sure that people are well cared for, well thought of when you're asking these questions. And if you want to read up on ways that you can have this conversation with them, please go check out, the starter guide on Laura's site, pages 7 to 9. And then we'll get a little bit more expressive and a little bit more open with each other. All
Charlie,
right?
can they fill in the blank themselves or with one of their teammates?
Let me see here. So the idea here is that the person that is being photographed, that is their inner truth. That is their struggle that they're having, so that they're allowing outwardly what is happening inside, but they're also going to make it look like this perfect, beautiful thing, because we want to subvert the idea that this toxic sort of everything is great that we sometimes see on social media. I mean, people can have fun, but there's also a little bit of something there that we hold up too many standards that are too perfect. So we're going to push back on that a little bit.
Can I say one last thing before we?
Of course, please.
So when you ask them for their struggle and their truth about how they're really feeling, just remember you can say thank you for sharing when they share with you, and an acknowledge and validate statement like, that makes sense, right? So that makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. It really means a whole lot to people when you acknowledge and validate their feelings and makes them feel like, oh, I'm not weird or there's something wrong with me for having feelings. No, because feelings are universal. So yeah, and I put the compassioncodestarterguide.com link in the chat too, so people can go check that out and have a little handout literally so they can read it before they go talk to somebody about, yeah. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for coming, and thank you to everybody. Drink water, get rest, stay rested, take care of yourself, have a little bit more compassion after this panel. Just take a minute maybe to even think about how great you are. All right. Have a great day.